What is China up to? That's a very big question, and the answer depends on who you ask, obviously. But late on Monday night, the government here issued a pretty strong statement condemning the Chinese government's role in cyber attacks that affected people around the globe. We've been hearing about that on news, and Jenny Major's talking about it with Judith Collins. It was an overt move by New Zealand compared to the softly approach successive New Zealand governments have preferred to take with an authoritarian regime that is our largest and most easily offended trading partner. It was also done in concert with the United States, Britain, Canada and Australia and others, including the European Union. But our very public shoulder to shoulder with our Five Eyes partner is a point. Five Eyes partners is a point being made, obviously. And our traditional mates are making the point very strongly. Listen to Australia Home Affairs Minister Karen Andrews.
We are aware that there are serious implications for any attribution that is made to any nation, but we also will not compromise our position on sovereignty and national security. And in this instance, along with our partner nations, we needed to call out this malicious cyber attack.
We are one of those partner nations, of course. Where to from here? Joining us with their expert analysis of our shifting relationship with China, a tightrope walk at which we seem forever teetering somewhere between behaving morally and looking after trade. We're delighted to welcome back to breakfast from Christchurch Professor Brady, who lectures in Chinese politics at the University of Canterbury, has spent more than 25 years researching the Chinese Communist Party. Morena, Professor Brady, it's so good to have you with us. Thank you for being here. And from Dunedin, a little bit south of you, Professor Robert Patman, International Relations Specialist at the University of Otago. Morena, Professor Patman, it's really good to have you both with us. Thank you.
Morena, John.
Anne-Marie Brady, can I start with you? And boy, this is a funny old piece of language, isn't it? Andrew Little's statement that came out at 11 o'clock on Monday night to coincide with when everyone else was doing their bit. New Zealand condemns malicious cyber activity by Chinese state-sponsored actors. When we talk about Chinese state-sponsored actors, we're talking about the Chinese state, aren't we? We're talking about the CCP.
Kia ora, John. Yes, the more detailed statement from other countries say that the Ministry of State Security was involved behind proxy companies and groups who are engaging in malicious cyber activity. So, and the malicious cyber activity ranged from economic espionage to trying to get information on medical research from HIV to Ebola, and also seeking out military technological information. So this is a series of very serious breaches, and according to the detailed information from other states who also issued these condemnation of China's behaviour, the Ministry of State Security was involved. Also, Andrew Hampton from the GCSB mentioned MSS yesterday too.
Yeah. Robert, can I just go south from Professor Brady to you, Professor Batman, and ask what choice did New Zealand have here? It looks to me like a repositioning of New Zealand as rigorously part of the Five Eyes. After a sort of period of vague equivocation, is this us doing our bit in terms of our traditional partnerships?
Morena, John, I think this has been in the works for some time. The Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister have both spoken in public about increasingly complicated relations with China and what the Prime Minister has characterised as increasingly irreconcilable differences. So I think this has been preparing us for such a step. I think the reason New Zealand's gone further, and by the way, I don't think we had a lot of choice.
No.
Because the implications of not saying anything with virtually most other liberal democracies in the international arena speaking out would have been dire and would have put us in the sort of master-servant category, which would be completely unacceptable to most Kiwis. So I think the government was absolutely correct and right to speak out, but I think the political choices were limited. And I think the point to note here is, the reason we've not been prepared to be an echo of the Five Eyes, but we are prepared to speak out with other liberal democracies, not least from the EU and Japan, to bring together what is a very formidable challenge, I believe, to the Chinese leadership. They haven't, as they did as happened with Russia earlier in the year, they haven't followed with sanctions, but the ball is now in China's court.
Yes, some of the language from the Chinese embassy up there in Kelburn Thorndon was predictable and vehement, but one wonders what happens next. Anne-Marie Brady, I want to come back to you. And I guess in a way, what we are seeing here is a response to impact on our shores, right? So the GCSB is involved. It seems to me, and you may want to disagree with me, but I've been reading back overnight, that the language we've used here is stronger and more explicit, more singularly explicit than the language we've used in relation to the Uyghur camps, genocide, whatever word you want to use, to the suppression and repression of democracy and the freedom of the press in Hong Kong. So why now? Why is New Zealand stepping up now? And is this going to mean we will display greater moral leadership in other areas regarding China? Should we, for example?
John, those are separate issues. This is about national security. So we speak on principle about severe human rights abuses, such as has been happening in Xinjiang and Hong Kong. But here we're talking about our national security. And this is the 5th time in the last 3 years that the GCSB has publicly named China for malicious cyber activity. And they don't do so lightly. New Zealand and all the other countries would have, behind the scenes, already spoken to China and raised concerns.
Right.
You know, there's an international agreement on cyber norms that was signed by the 193 states who are members of the United Nations. China signed it too. So it has breached its multilateral commitments as well as its bilateral agreement. It has an agreement with the United States and Australia on proper behaviour around cyber activities. And there is a hotline because of that bilateral relationship, and there was also a dedicated email communication. So all representation to China would have been made in advance of this public attribution. And New Zealand would also have made communication to China non-publicly about its concerns. We had over 320 serious cyber events in the last year, and GCSB tell us that 30% of those in that last year were from state actors, and the previous year was 38%. And China, they have told us at other times, is the main state actor. China, Russia and North Korea, but the greatest number of attempts are coming from China, and GCSB in the last 3 years has called out China 5 times. And so this is not new. On issues of national security, New Zealand must speak up. National security trumps economic security. Without national security, we have no economic security.
Which, Robert Patman, segues very nicely to the point you were making early in your first answer, that, and I was referring to this as a Five Eyes thing, but of course the EU are involved, Japan is involved. So the world, Robert Patman, is staring China down now, and I wonder what China does next.
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? I think I think it's clear that China. I don't expect China to come clean and say, "Oh yes, we made a mistake, we overreached ourselves." That's not going to happen. This is an authoritarian state which doesn't tolerate opposition at home, and we can't expect it to be candid about its shortcomings internationally. I think there's 2 scenarios as I see it, John. One is to maintain the blanket denials, but quietly change its behaviour. Therefore, it can sort of maintain a sense of face. But the second possibility, I think this is less likely, but it could happen, is that China maintains the blanket denials and continues this sort of activity. And if it does, then I think it will walk into sanctions. And let's be quite candid on this. China's prosperity and its rise to superpower status has been based on access to crucial markets like the EU, the United States, Japan. These are 3 very big trade partners. So if they start falling out with very big trade partners, they risk compromising economic growth, and that risks in turn the political legitimacy of the Communist Party of China. So I'd be very surprised if they want to confront everyone involved in issuing this statement.
So, Robert, I want to stay with you, and then I'm going to return to you, Professor Brady. But, Robert, what you're saying here is ultimately it may be in the CCP's self-interest, and I can't think of many more self-interested groups on the planet than the CCP, to not push this further, to not risk trade sanctions with countries like Japan, the United States, and the entire European Union?
Yes, I think so, but we're looking at it somewhat rationally here, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
The point to note here is that China, like many authoritarian states, may be sceptical that Western liberal democracies or liberal democracies in the world can maintain a united line against it.
Yeah.
It manipulates things at home. It expects to manipulate things abroad.
And it does. I mean, look, boy, they have their way in the world. I just want to push you on that point very quickly, Robert Patman. Can the liberal Western democracies you were just referring to maintain a united front? Can the European Union, the United States, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the Five Eyes, ad infinitum, all work together on this?
I think so, yes. And the reason I think so is because I think the interconnected world we now live in, many countries, not just New Zealand, critically depend on what could be called the international rules-based order. We have a huge self-interest in maintaining that, and so do most countries in the world.
Yeah. And Brady, I want to come back to you. And I don't know many people who've studied this more than you, for longer than you. What does this tell us about the Chinese Communist Party? What insight into their megalomaniacal, solipsistic, bullying id do we get from the continuation of this kind of behaviour?
Well, this sort of behaviour is the behaviour of great powers, and might is right. So we can expect that, as happened when the United States and China signed their cyber agreement, that there will be a lessening of behaviour for a while, and then it'll go up again. That's been the pattern in the past, and North Korea is a bit like this too. So we have to see the People's Republic of China as it is, not the way we would like it to be. And our government is, as I've shown in my research, has been making steady adjustments in that relationship, and on a case-by-case basis, calling out particular issues. So it's not necessarily completely unique to China behaviour. It's the behaviour of the great powers. However, the other leading powers in the world do strongly uphold and value the international rules-based order. And increasingly, we are seeing the behaviour of China and Russia is that they will act in the way before we had the rules-based order. Might is right.
Gosh, this is a fascinating time in human history, isn't it? Professor Anne-Marie Brady and Professor Robert Patman, we're so grateful for you. You're both great guests, and we had you both on. You're in complete agreement with each other. I mean, there's lovely consensus from our guests. I always feel wiser at the end of our conversations than I did at the start of it. So, Professor Brady and Professor Patman, thank you both very much for your time. We really appreciate it. And keep up your fine work, you two. Thank you.